Hey, welcome to the Jennifer O'Brien Show. I'm your host, Jennifer O'Brien. I'm super excited. With me today, I have Pastor Artur Pawlowski, and we're going to sit down and just chat. And I just would love to hear what's on his heart. I know he's been all over the news lately, even down here in the United States. And I've been closely watching you guys up in Canada and really just seeing what's going on and very concerned for Canada, by the way, but also concerned for our country and just not our country. I think this is a global evil that we are up against. And I believe you're on the front line. And I'd love for you to just start sharing your story. And yeah, just let's jump right in. And I'm going to turn it over to you. Okay. And hello. So it looks like we're frozen. Let's see if we can come back from that. Oh, there you are. Okay, it was frozen for a second.
Oh,
So, okay.
well, rightfully so, you should be concerned about what's happening across the border because, like, quite often I am referring to Canada as China. That we are truly living behind the Iron Curtain. And as you can tell by my accent, I grew up under the boots of the Soviets. I grew up behind the Iron Curtain. And I have seen firsthand the atrocities of communism and socialism. And of course, being a Polish immigrant, when I was growing up as a kid, I heard the stories of Nazism and fascism and the Germans attacking, pillaging, murdering. By the way, in my city, when I was growing up, there was a concentration camp, and as kids, we were playing in the bunkers of the Nazis and in places where they were doing all those horrible things to other human beings. So, as a Polish
Wow.
immigrant, I have seen and
Hmm.
I've heard from my grandparents, and my grandma was in Auschwitz-Birkenau. Of course, I visited a number of concentration camps throughout my life. Sometimes I would take Americans and Canadians from
Hmm.
here to Poland to show them what a man is capable of doing if you don't put a check on that man's power. So you should be greatly concerned
Yep.
about what's happening in Canada because we used to be your greatest ally.
Hmm.
Now I think we have become one of your greatest enemies. I mean, you should be concerned and scared because Canadian government went rogue. We have become a totalitarian police state with the dictators ruling over us. There is nothing democratic about our democratic country right now. The elections are stolen from us. People that are the least popular are winning elections, which is, of course, unbelievable. Mainstream media, we do not have any media
Hmm.
outside, of course, a private, some there are private outlets. Mainstream media has been bought. The totalitarian regime of Justin Trudeau gave
Yeah.
$4 billion to the media to lie about what's going on. And that's exactly what they do. I don't know if you heard, Justin Trudeau was in Europe and he was booed, and there were a
Yeah.
number of politicians that said he's a dictator, a disgrace,
Hmm.
and hundreds of members of parliament, European Parliament, stood up and walked out of his speech. And you know what the mainstream media in Canada said? That he received a standing ovation. So
Oh, yeah.
that's
It's,
the level of manipulation, misinformation, a
yeah.
lie coming from the mainstream media.
Well, I think just to interrupt quickly, I think the reason I was so drawn to what was happening in Canada with the truckers and with your speech and what was going on with you guys, I feel like we're going through very similar things down here in the United States. You had given a speech about you think we elected these officials. No, they're appointed, and we just went through an election last a couple years ago in 2020. There's a vast majority of people that believe that election was rigged and stolen, and rightly so. And as more information continues to come out, you can connect the dots that you have someone like Biden who was not very popular. I mean, they kept the guy on lockdown during COVID. He never came out. And then you had someone like Trump. Now, granted, a lot of people didn't like Trump, but that was done. He is who he is.
Yeah.
But we believe the same thing, that our elections are now compromised. For how long they've been compromised, that's up for debate. But when I see what you guys are going through, we are going through very similar things here. The media is lying. It's fake news. It's so hard to get the truth. You have to go digging. You have to ask the right questions. And my big concern is seeing what's going on with you guys, thinking we're right behind, and what happened with people funding the truckers up in Canada, them going and ceasing bank accounts. I mean, this is real, but I believe it's also affecting us. So, as someone, that's why I'm really drawn to your story. You grew up in this. You mentioned, and I've listened to some of your speeches about your wife. Can you share a little bit about your wife? Was she not born in jail, and also the stuff, that the persecution your family has been under is incredible.
Yes, I grew up in 70s and 80s in Poland. So if you know anything about the history, solidarity movement popped up at that time with Lech Wałęsa. People in the early 80s took to the streets, and simply they said, we are not going to work for you tyrants anymore. We're not your slaves. You're not our masters. We're free people. We want to be free people. You have enslaved us after the Second War, when the Russians occupied Poland since 1945 to 1989. Poland was not a free country. While the Europe was celebrating the victory over the fascism, over Hitler, Polish people were crying because we were taken over by communism, which is as evil and sick
Mhm.
as fascism. So I grew up in an environment like this. I've seen the abuse of power. I've seen the uniformed police officers being the muscle for the biggest mafia, the so-called politicians. My wife as a kid, she was smuggling pamphlets for solidarity movement, and
Mhm.
her mom before that, she forged documents and she tried to escape communism. So forging documents for a law-abiding citizen sounds horrible, right? Smuggling stuff sounds horrible, but when you're growing up in a totalitarian regime, you just want to escape the
Mhm.
atrocities of that oppressive government. So her mom forged documents, and she tried to cross the border, and she was caught. So she ended up in prison, and she was pregnant, and that's where my wife was born. She was born
Wow.
in a Soviet run prison because her mom tried to escape communism. So fast forward, we're growing up. My wife,
Mhm.
in her place, and I grew up in closer to the German border. And then my parents decided, okay, enough is enough. We want a better life for our children. So they took me and my younger brother David, and we literally escaped on a boat to Istanbul, Turkey, and then from Turkey to Greece. And then we were living there for a number of years until Canadian government opened its borders for us. We had a number of nations that we could escape to, including America, but we've chosen Canada. Canada was always perceived as a very peaceful nation, as a free nation, a nation that is kind of like a mix together. No one will persecute you for your faith here, and that's what we wanted. We just wanted to be
Mhm.
left alone. We are hardworking immigrants. We established number of businesses in Greece, and I remember when we were in embassy, the officer said to us, "You know what? Sell everything you have and bring your money to Canada, and you can start all over, build your life." And
Mhm.
that was the dream. I mean, I think that's the dream for everyone that escapes those types of totalitarian regimes. You want to start all over, and you want to work hard and give something good to the next generation, to your children. And that was my dream. I wanted to build a house and have children and give something good, something that I didn't have, to them, freedom to
Right.
start. and be
Right.
able to work hard and achieve something good, and then buy a house and a car. I mean, something that it was very difficult for us to achieve under the totalitarian regime, because communism, socialism, fascism steals everything from you. 50,000 communists were ruling over 36 million Poles, 50,000 masters, and the rest were slaves. So, fast forward, we started our business back in Canada. It was quite successful. And
Mhm.
I thought I'm truly living in a free and democratic society. But I decided to share my wealth. I decided to help the poor. So I started to go to the streets and I started to feed the homeless people. 2005, the government came to me and said that giving free goods and services is actually punishable by law and it's illegal. I was shocked because I read the Constitution. I've read the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and it states that there are certain parts of that which are called fundamental freedoms. I mean,
Mhm.
unshakable, if you will. And a preamble to our Constitution, to the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, states, whereas Canada acknowledges the supremacy of God and the rule of law. And I look at those officers and I said, you're out of your mind. So you're telling me
Right.
if I give a sandwich to a dying kid on the street, I'm breaking the law? Yes. Then they charged me with distribution of printed material, so gospel tracts, Bibles. My Bibles were confiscated by the police. I mean, crazy stuff.
Wow.
There's so many things that I can talk about, but just in to give you in a perspective, 16 arrests so far, over 100 court cases, all related to either my sermons or me feeding the poor. I have never been arrested for any other crime than
Yeah.
being a pastor and doing what the Bible is telling me to do. So
Wow.
340 citations. I don't know if people can comprehend what I'm saying. Hundreds of tickets I received, all related to the ministry of saving lives.
So
And
go ahead.
one more thing, we are self-funded. Government
Mhm.
gives us zero. They
Oh,
never.
yes, I saw that. I saw that. So they've shut that down. So you are not even operating under what most churches operate under, where you so the government, like, I'm not quite sure how that works with you all as far as taxes are concerned, but I did notice that as I was researching your church. So my question is this just you, or are there other pastors that are undergoing this kind of persecution?
Anyone that dares to stand up to them. I mean, if you're kind of flying under the radar, most likely you will be left alone. And we
Mhm.
were left alone for 3 years of the ministry. So the first 3 years, no one cared. Police was coming. We were in a public space, so we would see police from time to time. No one would say a word. Actually, quite often, police would thank us for what we are doing, because
Mhm.
we would be changing the neighborhoods of ghettos, where there are drug trafficking businesses, prostitutes, etc. So the police would come and thank us for our service, and we would feed those people. And when we were there was a lot less crime, we were told by the police. However, we became very successful and
Mhm.
very visible. The mainstream media started to write articles about us. So they were featuring us in their news reports. So the politicians stepped in. You see, now I know what I didn't know at that time. Anyone that works outside of the beast system, if you will, outside of
Mhm.
their box. So if you're not part of the government business called homelessness, which the government designates in a province of Alberta, designates $230 million every single year. So it's a big fat business. The
Mhm.
shelters are run per head. What that means is the more cattle, the more heads, the more money that the shelters are receiving. So it's a very huge business. I remember when I started to ask questions, where is the money? where is the money going to whom is the money going to? And they quickly started to harass me and to hammer me. When you look at the problem of homelessness, and when you're asking the right questions, hundreds of millions of dollars every single year, I would like to see the receipts. I would like to see where the money is going to, because obviously it's not going to the homeless. Why I
Mm.
know that? Because I work with the homeless and I hear their stories.
Wow.
So anyway, we have become an enemy of the state, if you will. Also, we were so successful that within the first 3 months of establishing Street Church ministry, we took 600 people off the streets. Most of the street people are drug addicts. When you multiply
Mhm.
their addiction, usually it takes about $100 a day, average on drugs per homeless person. We're talking about millions of dollars that someone was losing every single month. And we have this famous saying in Poland, when if you don't know what the whole thing is all about, it's always about money. So follow the money, and then you will know what's really going on. And I think that's exactly what happened. We have become too successful. The shelters were losing clients, and therefore they were losing money from the government because they're being paid
Wow.
per head. Believe it or not, the shelters with the city of Calgary took us to court. So that tells you everything. Shelters are supported by the government. We were never supported, and we are still not supported by the government. And the shelters were so upset that we are interfering with their business by removing homeless people off the streets, that they took us to court. So don't kid yourself. Majority
Wow.
so-called shelters and organizations that are working with the homeless, they don't have anything good in mind. It's just a big fat business. So the government 2008 sent me a letter, and they took our charitable tax status. And here is the most bizarre thing, part of the story. They cited that because I speak negatively about abortion, I speak negatively about homosexuality, I speak negatively about divorce, therefore that's considered political. And in Canada, you're not allowed to be political if you're a pastor. So that's how they span the story. You're political because you're talking about divorce, you're talking about abortion, you're talking about homosexuality, therefore you're not eligible to have a charitable status. What they were trying to do, they tried to destroy me financially. um,
Mhm.
because of course we were not receiving any funds from the government. Everything we were doing was private donations, just like we're doing right now. So
Mhm.
therefore they wanted to hurt us by stopping people from giving to us, because we were not allowed to give them a tax receipt. Fast forward 10 years, I fought with them, 100 court cases, and I won. I won
Wow,
in
that's
court.
great.
I lost millions of dollars. They almost bankrupt me. My house was, I was told that it's going to be going on foreclosure. I was not able to pay the property taxes. They almost finished me off
Mhm.
completely. I had to sell properties that I used to buy when I was in the business realm. So it was brutal. It was unbelievable, but I won. And they let me be for a few years, and then the COVID came. And I think
Mhm.
COVID did few things. It showed us how far we have fallen from the republic and how far we have fallen from democracy. It showed us that the government is extremely corrupted, that the government officials are not anymore representing people. They are bullies, they're tyrants, and it's all about them. They are there for their own purposes. It has nothing to do with safety, it has nothing to do with protecting our rights. There are little tyrants that are stealing left and right for their own benefits. COVID era showed us that it's all about tyranny. It's all about
Mhm.
control.
Yeah.
Those laws that were laws in quote that were implemented had nothing to do, with keeping our loved ones safe.
Right.
Of course, the data, the statistics, for example, they were telling me I have to shut down the church. Why? Because we're in the middle of the greatest pandemic and people are dying left and right, and the hospital might be overwhelmed and could be overwhelmed. They are using the words might be, could be, uh,
Mhm.
happened, right? So we
Right.
did our own investigation, and behold, we found out that in 2020, when this craziness was at its height, um,
Mhm.
we had the lowest ICU admissions since 2015. And then, of course, the mainstream media would say that the ICUs are filled to capacity. My
Mhm.
mom was during that time in ICU, and she said she was the only one in the entire floor. So she would send me pictures and videos. Then I look for the data, and this is a public stuff. I'm not making
Mhm.
stuff up. You can actually find this information. Um, I find out that hospitalization was at its record low since 2018. So I started asking questions.
Yeah.
We are in the middle of the greatest pandemic, and people are dying left and right. How come the data is telling us a different story?
Mhm. Mhm.
Boom, the hammer came heavy. The officers came. I became the first Canadian to get a COVID ticket. Why? Because I have a soup kitchen. I'm feeding thousands of people every week on the streets of Calgary, and I kept feeding them. They told me
Mhm.
my permit is revoked. I am not allowed to feed the poor. And I appealed it to the mayor, then I appealed it to the ministers and the premier. And I said, if we're truly in the middle of pandemic, let's say we are, then our services are needed more than ever. Because if you're shutting down the shelters, you were talking about 15,000 homeless people roaming the streets of Calgary. They're going to
Mhm.
get necessities of life this way or that way. If they're not going to get it from me and people like me, they're going to whack your mother's head. They're going to break into
Yeah.
your home. They're going to get it by break-ins, garages, cars, and I was right because later on the media were writing stories that the crime has increased like twice,
Mhm.
tripled. Of course, those people will need to survive somehow. Humans, I mean, and including me, if I was placed in a situation that I was starving or my kids were starving to death,
Yeah.
I would rob, probably. I would steal. I
Sure.
mean, there is nothing else to do to survive. What do? You die?
Right.
No, you try to survive. And it's just, so I'm not blaming even those people for trying to just survive
Sure.
another day. So shelters were shut down, the soup kitchens were shut down. I refused to shut down, so I became an enemy of the state
Yeah.
again. Then they
Yeah.
started to send police officers. I mean, just listen to this. The government of Canada declared that they're canceling Christmas because if you have anyone in your house during Christmas season, if you have a brother for coffee or you visit your mom, you're going to die. We're in the middle of the greatest pandemic, and if they catch you having a brother for coffee, you will be immediately arrested. So I just said enough is
What?
enough. You know,
See,
that's the
that's a whole nother level. That's a whole nother level.
That's the government. The government
Wow.
declared that they're canceling Christmas. And they're going to
Mhm.
be sending police officers monitoring neighborhoods if your driveway has more cars than normal. And I said, enough is enough. I went on television and I said, listen, people, you devils, I'm inviting people to the biggest Christmas celebration in the country. So I
Mhm.
put a big barbecue celebration, Christmas carols, gifts for the homeless, and I had lots of people showing up. However, I also had my record. Previously, I had my record of police officers attending my church services was 33 officers and I think 11 police cars. This time for Christmas, I had over 100 police officers, SWAT team, chief of police, and 52 police cars. Can you imagine what I'm even saying?
No.
Insanity at the highest level. And I end up with 15 COVID tickets for my crime of doing a Christmas festival. Then they started to come to our church and they would block our driveway. They would take a telescopic cameras, take pictures of our women and of our children. I mean, just like the Nazis. And people ask me, you're overboard. You're calling them Gestapo. You're calling them Nazi. You're calling them, psychopaths and KGB. I said, well, I am, because their tactics are very similar to the tactics
Mhm.
I have seen growing up behind the Iron Curtain and the tactics that I've learned from the older generation when the Gestapo was roaming my nation with the Nazis. So I said to the authorities, stop acting like a Nazi, and I will stop calling you Nazi. Of
Mhm.
course, we know what happened after. The video that was viewed by over 1 billion people. It was the most viewed video last year during that weekend, the Passover, the Easter
Mhm.
weekend, when they broke the law. They broke Criminal Code of Canada, Section 176, that prohibits them from doing what they did. They broke 3 laws, and they could face up to 2 years prison for that. But you see, it's lawlessness right now. They don't
Mhm.
care about the law. They tell me I'm a lawbreaker while they are breaking the law. It's like the Nazis when they declared that the Jewish people were lesser than animals and you can hunt them down and murder them and rob them and take their businesses. And that was the law. That was the official law.
Mhm.
And some people did follow that law. Some people called authorities on the Jewish people when they were hiding here and there, and off they went to the Auschwitz-Birkenau of that time. So we have to understand that just because they say it's a law, that doesn't mean it's actual law. It's just a made-up stuff by the tyrants, and that's exactly what we're witnessing right now in our democratic countries. So fast forward, I kicked them out. They
Mhm.
eventually left. They came back with a vengeance a few weeks later, and then they showed up with a SWAT team. Can you imagine? They came with a SWAT team to a church. I kicked
Wow.
them out again. They brought a court document. They have found few crooked judges that gave them the power to enter the church anytime they want and arrest me using any force deemed necessary. There was a judge, David Gates, and I don't know if he's related to your devil, Gates.
Bill. He's Bill's brother. No, I don't know who he is.
Could be some kind of a family, but David
Yeah.
Gates of Calgary has given them the power to enter the church and make havoc, and do whatever they want. Then they came back with another crooked order from a judge. His name is Rook, and this guy went completely overboard because he has given them power to arrest children, women, men, elderly, anywhere within the province of Alberta. So what he did, he enslaved 4.5 million Albertans, free people, and he said if they break any of those mandates and restrictions, you can arrest them all. So the police showed up. They entered the church. Of course, there was hundreds of people, only a standing room. So they withdraw themselves and they waited for me.
Mm.
We waited for the people to go home. We were driving home, me, my brother David, and another friend of ours, and then we were arrested in the middle of the highway by a SWAT team. Extremely dangerous takedown.
Mhm.
And then we were taken to jail. We spent 3 days and 2 nights on concrete, and then we were later released. At that time, I decided to come to United States and to warn you, because
Mhm.
here's what I'm here's what I'm seeing. We've lost our judicial system, we've lost our media, we've lost our educational system. We
Mhm.
are living behind the iron curtain.
Mhm.
We are living in China now. So Americans, if Americans will not pay attention to what is happening in north of them, um, you're going to face the same situation. You're going to face the same totalitarian regime. So what I wanted to achieve, I wanted to scare you to death. I wanted to tell my story and to let Americans know, if you're not careful, you're next. They came for me. They came for the Canadians. Now they're going to come for Americans. So I spent
Mm.
4 months touring around, and I was supposed to be there only for 3 weeks, but the reception was so unbelievable, and the
Mhm.
story resonated with the free Americans. So I
Mhm.
decided to stay another week, and it turned out I was there for 4 months. On the way back, I was arrested upon arrival. The moment I stepped out of the plane on a tarmac, I was
Mhm.
arrested by the customs, and then police was waiting like gangsters in a custom building. I faced criminal charges. So, what are my charges? Inciting people to come to church, participating in illegal gathering church service, officiating an illegal gathering church service, not wearing a muzzle, you know, not following the court orders, which are illegal,
Mhm.
nonsense like this, disturbing peace, trespassing. I mean, crazy stuff that, of course, is all made up,
Mhm.
not really a law. But again, we are being ruled by dictators, so whatever they
Right.
say goes. Fast forward, I got arrested again with my brother David because I dared to protest peacefully outside of
Mhm.
the minister's house that was hiding from us, would not reply to us, would not meet with us. So we came outside his house peacefully to say,
Mhm.
hey, we are citizens too, we have our rights, and we demand a meeting with you. We want to meet with someone from the government. He sent a helicopter and about 30 police cars on us. We were arrested, and then they placed more charges on me and my brother David. Fast forward, I have become quite popular in Canada. There's lots of people that are asking me to run for a political office. We had 15,000 to 20,000 people on the streets of Calgary week after week after week.
Mhm.
So my last interview, I was asked if I would consider running for a political office. And I said, if enough Canadians would like a person like me to run, I would consider running. And I think that scared the totalitarian dictators so much that when I was invited to participate in a truck convoy, so I was part of that. I
Mhm.
met the truckers on the way to Ottawa. I was part of the whole movement. And also, I was invited to give speeches and conduct church services, prayers before
Mhm.
those people. So I did. I came, I gave my speech, I offered my prayers, I fed them, I brought food for them to take. I was invited to Milk River. Milk River is 14 kilometers from the Montana border, Montana Alberta border. I gave
Mhm.
my church service there, Lord's Supper. RCMP was there. RCMP is like your FBI in Canada. They monitored me. They knew who I was. I talked to them. They filled me, no problems. We were actually led by RCMP to Coots. Coots is the point of entry to Montana and from Montana to Alberta. When I arrived there, the roads were open. When I left, the roads were open. I was not advocating for any closure of the roads. I just went there to cheer them up, to do a
Mhm.
church service, to do a Lord's Supper, to give a speech. That's what I do. Just encourage people to keep fighting for the rights peacefully. Within my
Mhm.
speech, 3 times, I was telling them peacefully, no guns, no swords. However, the politicians don't care about the merits. They don't care about our rights and freedoms. They let me out from that place, and few days later, I stepped out of my house and I was
Mhm.
arrested by a sting operation between the FBI, the RCMP, Calgary police, detectives, undercover. I mean, it was insane. They were parking undercover cars in front of my house, treating me like I am El Chapo, Al
Yeah.
Capone. I mean, insanity. Insanity. I was taken to the police, interrogated by RCMP officers, and then I was shipped to prison. I was charged criminally again, so I have dozen criminal charges. And when I was in prison, they piled more charges. They told the judge that I've breached probation, I'm
Mhm.
following orders, and if I'm released, actually they called me extremely dangerous. So I was charged with like a terrorism charge, and also with mischief about 5,000, breach of probation, all kinds of crazy stupid things, of course, that I didn't commit, but it didn't matter. They wanted me in prison. They wanted me out of the game. They didn't
Right.
wanted me to speak against the totalitarian regime. I was so popular. We had, like I said, 15, 20,000 people every single week.
Mhm.
So they thought I have become too popular and I needed to disappear. So they kept me in isolation. I was in solitary confinement. They placed me in a metal box like a dog, where I was suffocating. They placed me in a solitary confinement without water.
Wow.
They were inciting inmates to attack me. The guards said to some inmates, which they testified after to my lawyer and also to me, they were told by the guards. The guards said, by a mistake, we're going to leave the door open of Pawlowski's cell. Can you do him? Can you hurt him?
Wow.
Right? And that was multiple times. And it was not for the favor of God, and that those boys loved me. I mean, absolutely. I had such a
Sure.
respect in prison. I had more respect
Hmm.
with criminals, bank robbers, murderers, drug traffickers, overall, not very nice people. I had more respect from them than from so-called law-abiding citizens and the police officers, RCMP, and politicians. So that tells you a lot.
Yeah.
Uh, I was treated like a hero. Every day they would take me out, and I would spend hours on concrete, stripped naked,
Gosh.
body scanners, constant intimidation, in isolation. I mean,
Mhm.
absolute craziness. Which, if you know anything about solitary confinement, it's considered a torture. Then they
Mhm.
shipped me to Edmonton, and they placed me in a max pod, which is only for the most vicious, dangerous murderers that attacked guards or murdered someone in jail. So I was placed there after spending already 40 few days in Calgary with the boys there in my unit, where we were told by friendly guards that our unit is the most peaceful. I was conducting church services after when they let me out of isolation. I was doing Bible studies. I was changing those boys, hardcore criminals, into Christians. And I think that's what they were afraid of. Because you got to remember, jails are private here. So Calgary Remand Center is a private organization, and they're receiving a lots of money per head, again, money, and every day, 3 times a day, they're giving us drugs. So there is cocaine, there is fentanyl, there's all kinds of drugs being given freely to the inmates, and then the inmates are selling drugs to others. So it's a
What?
big business going on, facilitated by the nurses and the guards in the jail system. I watched that for 50 days, every single day, 2 3 times a day. The nurses would come with drugs. I was offered drugs. I saw drugs being sold, bought, you name it. And
Oh
I'm
my
talking
gosh.
about hardcore drugs. So people go nuts over there. And then I was taken to MaxPod, and then from MaxPod they placed me in a mental unit. Believe it or not, they took me to a unit, and I knew there's something fishy about this, something crazy. And I asked the guards, where am I? Because I saw people walking in a circle, I saw people jumping up and down, so I knew there's something not quite right here. And they were laughing. I think they thought it was hilarious that the pastor is being placed in a mental institution
Mhm.
in a remand center in Edmonton, and they said, "This is a wild, wild west. You're in a mental ward." So I did what I do. I prayed for the people, and soon I
Mhm.
established Bible study and church service for those people. And I spent about a week there, and then I was 4 in the morning transferred back to Calgary, stripped naked again on multiple occasions, constantly being pressured. For a week they would not give me glasses, so I could not read. They would not give me Bible. I had to call the lawyers. For 3 weeks they would not allow me to see my lawyers. So that's your
Wow.
so-called justice system. And when I was being pressured every single day, the crown prosecutor made an offer that they're going to withdraw all the charges but one. If I plead guilty, I can go home. So that's how they do it. They are depriving you from your human rights to
Mm.
force you to quit, to force you to plead guilty, so you can. So the horror of this physical, mental, psychological, spiritual torture
Mhm.
will end. The pressure was coming from left and right. When I was placed on a maximum security unit by myself, in entire unit, because I was considered the most dangerous inmate in the facility. Like now, I
Wow.
mean, I don't know if we can fully comprehend what I'm saying. It sounds like a science fiction movie.
Mhm.
I was considered the most dangerous. And excuse me, why? Because I was preaching the gospel. I challenged the totalitarian regime, and I've told the politicians that they are traitors, they are turncoats, they are dictators. And of course, another part of the story is that Jason Kenney, the premier of Alberta, with his cabinet ministers, Chandra, the minister of health at that time, that was promoted after this craziness. I think he was a good Nazi. He was promoted to become minister of justice. Can you imagine a crook promoted to the minister of
The
justice? And
irony.
yeah, solicitor general. I don't know, you can Google it up if you want. There was a story of Sky Palace hypocrisy. So premier of Alberta, minister of finance, minister of environment, and minister of health at that time, Chandra Taylor, they had a party. They made the mandates. They made the regulations. They've told us that if we have a brother or a sister or a mother or a father in our home for coffee, we will be immediately arrested. I was arrested because of this order. My brother David, we are facing criminal charges. We face trials already. I've lost hundreds of thousands of dollars because of this,
Mhm.
right? And they broke the same restrictions, and they
Mm.
were caught red-handed. They were caught. It was a scandal all over the place. But of course, there's one law for me and one law for D. There's unequal
Right.
application of the law, and there was, of course, no charges against them. There was no penalties, no tickets,
Sure.
courts.
Because the law doesn't apply to them anymore. And it is so everything you say, I see happening here on maybe not to the level you're quite experiencing, but the concern and a couple things I want for you to share because I believe that right now I think good is called evil and evil is called good. And that seems to be a global national issue. And we're watching it play out with you guys up in Canada. And you're to me, I consider you like a modern day Paul. I mean, when I read Corinthians and he's shipwrecked and he's naked and he's jailed and he's hungry and he's cold, it's just like his list goes on and on and on. I just think about what you've been through with what you've been dealing with. So because you came here, you warn people in the States, you're sharing your story, what do you have to say, one, to the pastors here, in the States and all around the world, and two, to just the average person that's like, I'm done. I'm not going to stand for this anymore. You have to have some strong faith to be able to go through what you've gone through and come out on the other side still fighting, still persevering. So, one, I'd like for you to speak about your faith a little, but two, what can you say to people that haven't quite gone to the place you've gone to yet, but I feel in my spirit it's coming, and how do we stand up under it? So, yes, I'd like to hear that.
Well, a few things. Just because I would say this to the sold outs, pastors, clergymen, and politicians that chose not to stand up and not to fight. You see, they think by keeping their mouth shut, by obeying totalitarian regimes, the Hitlers, the Stalins of today, the Nebuchadnezzars of today are going to leave them alone. Just history is teaching us that that's not going to be the case. Sooner or later, they will come for you. See, they came for me today. Be sure of it. They're going to come for you tomorrow. And that was my message a few years ago when I was
Mhm.
the first Canadian to be hammered by this nonsense. I warned them. I said, they came for me. You will see, police officers, you're doing this for the totalitarian regime right now. They come for you too.
Yeah.
You think you're immune? You think just because you have a badge, you are, immune from the tyranny? No, your kids will pay the price. Your loved
Mhm.
ones, your mothers, your fathers, your cousins, your sisters, your brothers, your children eventually will pay the price. If you will not stand up for me, you will be hammered as well tomorrow. So that's the first thing. Second, ultimately, you are betraying Jesus Christ, like Judas Iscariot. You have sold your inheritance like Esau. for a bowl of soup, for comfort. Well, I
Mhm.
want to eat now or I will die, he said. I need the food. And he was willing to give up what God has given him as a gift. Freedom is a gift. Jesus
Mhm.
Christ died on the cross for our freedom. Do not give that back to a totalitarian regimes. And also there's a huge cloud of witnesses, of people that pay the price for us to be able to preach the gospel, for us to be able to live in a free and a democratic society. People died, bled, went to war and never came back for my rights to be a
Mhm.
Christian, for your rights to be a Christian. So if you
Mhm.
think that God is pleased with you because you kept your door shut, because you're forcing people to wear a muzzle like dogs, because you will not allow people to come into your church without a passport, a Soviet fascist passport, COVID red passport. I mean, if you're doing that, you're part of the beast system. Because in my Bible, from the beginning to the end, there are people that would not obey evil laws. They were considered lawbreakers. For example, Shadrach, Meshach, and
Yeah.
Abednego, they
Yep.
go to the fire because they refused to obey the law. It
Yep.
was the law. That's it. The king
Yep.
said it's the law. And I'm wondering if those pastors, those clergymen today would bow before the golden image just because the governor or the mayor or whatever, the police officer told them so.
Yeah.
Uh, so we got Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and they said, "Oh, great king, know this: even if God will not rescue us, we're not going to bow before your golden image. Period,
Mhm. Amen.
because that's against the law of God." So when they told me you cannot feed the poor, I said, "Well, then your law is against the law of God, and I'm going to listen to the law of God rather than your law." In the chapter 4 of Book of Acts, there is this famous statement by the apostles, and they said, "You be the judges whom we are to obey, you
Yes.
or God." In the chapter 5, they say a very straightforward statement: we must obey God rather than man. I mean, there's no question about it. If the law of man interferes with the law of God, you have to obey the law of God instead of the law of man. So
Amen.
another thing I want to tell the Christians is that our tendency is to avoid the fire, the pinch, the hardship, if you will. But you
Mhm.
got to remember that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were thrown into the fiery furnace, and those that threw them died first. So in the fire, God deals with your enemies. In the fire, God deals with your bondage. If you know the story, you know when they came out, there was not even and nothing, and not
Right.
even
It didn't even smell like smoke. Right. Right.
right.
It didn't even touch them. Yeah.
So God deals with your enemies when you're willing to pay the price. And let
Yeah.
me just say this to you: it cost the father his son, it cost the son his own life, his own blood. Do you really think it's not going to cost you anything to be a follower of Christ? While Jesus said, "They persecuted me, they will persecute you. They hated me, they'll hate you." And
That's
that
right.
just a given. If you're living a godly life, the enemy will not like it and will
Yeah.
hammer you, will throw you into the fire. So instead of running away from the fire, we should
Mhm.
be willing to go to the fire, because that's where God deals with our enemies. That's where he deals with our bondage, our afflictions, our problems. That's where we have a testimony. That's where Jesus shows up to purify us, to sanctify us.
Yes.
I
Yeah.
mean, fire is a purification uh, process. God is separating the sheep from the goats, the sheep from the wolves. Also in a fire, the whole world is watching
Mhm.
how we behave. And in the fire is our promotion. So instead of running away from the fire, I say to every one of you, run towards the fire. That's where
Mm.
your answer is. As uncomfortable as this might be, God shows up in the fire. He purifies his gold and his silver in the fire. So another
Mm.
thing I would say to the
Good.
people: if you will not stand up now, your children are going to pay the price tomorrow.
Yes.
If
That's
you don't
right.
want to do it for you, some people are getting older and they look in the mirror and they say, "Well, I don't have much time, and I'm too old, and this and that." Well, if you don't want to do it for yourself, I get
Mhm.
that. Do it for your children and your grandchildren.
Yes.
Do it for the next generation. What kind of a nation are you going to leave behind? It's
Yeah.
up to you. Another thing is, people come to me and they say, "Hey, what can we do? What can we do? There's nothing we can do." I know that's not true. History is teaching us that there is more of us than of the villains.
Mm-hmm.
There is more of us. Solidarity movement, civil rights movement, Mahatma
Mm-hmm.
Gandhi style, Martin Luther King Jr., and others
Mm-hmm.
is a proof in a pudding that if we unite, if we will forget about all the 10,000 things that could, bring a division, and if we would just focus on what unites us, the blood, the cross, the name that is above every other name, the God that we serve, if we would unite under the umbrella of freedom, we
Mm-hmm.
can win this, and we can win this peacefully. We
Yes.
don't need guns and swords and burning stuff. No, non-compliance,
Mm-hmm.
civil disobedience, saying I refuse to work for tyrants. So if the police officers, now imagine if the police department would say, no, we're not going to arrest law-abiding citizens just because they're protesting. No, we're
Mm-hmm.
not going to do it. It would be over for the tyrants. I mean, that's how quickly it would
Right.
be over if the muscle, because that's what they are. They're gangsters for the mafia right now, the
Mm-hmm.
so-called police officers. And if they would not have the muscle, they're soldiers, the politicians would be powerless because it's just few of them.
Right. Right.
That's power that we have. So if you want your country, you better rise up, you better stand up, because I'm telling you, they will not stop. They are like cancer.
Yeah.
Cancer spreads, cancer eats everything, and cancer
Yes.
never stops. Cancer needs to be cut out.
Yes. Absolutely. And I feel like Canada, you guys woke us up, the truckers there, everything that's, happened with the truckers, and we've got a people's convoy here, and I know the truckers are still aligning with the Canadian truckers, the US truckers. But I believe it is, for me, I'm getting more involved in showing up more on a political level, locally, trying to figure out who are the candidates that are going to go in and do the job, and not that aren't bought and paid for, that aren't compromised, because our governments, it seems nationally, this is such an evil, and it's really taken over. Yeah, I was when you said there's few of them, I believe that. I believe there's more of us that want freedom. Now they all want us to focus on the Ukrainian-Russian war, and Russia bad, Ukrainians good. And see, the truth is, the people of these nations, just like you and I, we just all want the same thing. We just want to have the freedom to love God, to love others, and to carry out the mission that we're here as Christians. We can talk, we're here to go make disciples. And that freedom is under attack. That freedom now is what we do as Christians is being called evil, and what's evil is being called good. And um I know better than to think that somebody with flesh and blood is the enemy. This has got to be more than just um flesh and blood. This is definitely a demonic evil that is infiltrated governments around the world, nations around the world, using people that don't bow to God as their pawns to inflict these incredible oppressive measures on the people. So I really appreciate you being kind of a front line pastor of our time, going for it. And it's given me courage, and I believe given a lot of people courage to start standing up. And I know that there's a lot of people that just thought, well, somebody else, that's always somebody else's problem, or that's what he does, or that's what she does. So, real quick, for somebody that's just kind of a little unsure, waking up to this, new to taking a stand, new to just speaking out, how would you encourage somebody that's never really stood up for anything before to kind of say, how do you help that person that might be a little intimidated by this? I feel like we're in a moment in history where we're drawing lines in the sand, and we can't just sit back anymore. We have to start taking a stand. So for those that are a little intimidated, how would you encourage those people to take that stand in this hour?
Well, in the Bible, it says the wicked flee though no one is pursuing him, but the righteous are as bold as lions. So you have to
Yeah.
understand, first of all, who our God is.
Hmm.
Who is your God? I mean, how big is your God? I think that's the
Hmm.
most powerful question right now. How big is your God? Is your God bigger than Goliath? You see, David understood who his God was. The
Yes.
Israelites and Saul and Jonathan and others, they didn't really know who their God is. We
Mhm.
have to understand our God is the most powerful God. There's only one God, and that's
Mhm.
our God. And He's the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. He's the creator of heavens and the earth. He's the Alpha and Omega. He's the beginning and the end. His life itself. Our enemies are in the palm of His hands. You see, my enemies are alive because my papi, my father,
Mhm.
allows them to wake up in the morning. So we have to understand who our God is. Also, we
Mhm.
have to understand who we are in God. David knew who he was. He
Mhm.
was the child of the Most High God, a beloved. David understood that when God gave him victory over the lions and the bears, He's also going to give him victory over this uncircumcised Biden, this uncircumcised Hillary Clinton, the witch,
Yes. Mhm.
uncircumcised Obama, or whatever Fauci, the Pinocchio liar, deceiver, manipulator. So we have to understand that with
Mm.
God, we're always the majority. So if
Yeah.
God is for you, who can stand against you? Greater is He that is in me than the one that is in those wicked, evil traitors. Uh,
Mm.
so um,
Mm.
you got to start small. If you're a little bit intimidated, just speak out, put it on Facebook or put it on YouTube or advocate. Like right now, I'm still a prisoner. I have
Mhm.
received house arrest. I am not allowed 24 hours a day to leave my house. I am still in prison. So I need people to call if you're intimidated and you, for whatever reason, at this moment you cannot pay the price, but you can support us. You can
Mhm.
support our lawyers. You can support the fight. I'm still feeding thousands of people, even though I cannot leave my house. The ministry is going. You can support us. You can make a phone call. You
Yeah.
can call the premier of Alberta and say, listen, drop the charges against Pastor Artur
Mhm.
Pawlowski, or we
Mhm.
will not do business with you. See, Americans are a power horse. If Montana or Texas or other states would say, we will not do business with Alberta until those charges are dropped, it's all
Mhm.
for the villains. That's
Yes.
how quickly this could end if
Yes.
people would come together and say, hey, you're acting like Putin, you're criticizing Putin, but you are a little dictator of your own. You're
Right.
doing the same thing that Putin was doing 10 years ago.
Mhm.
What is
Mhm.
going to happen in 10 years? Are you going to attack America? Are you going to attack Mexico? Are you going to attack some other country because now you are more powerful tyrant because you got
Yeah.
experience? You see, you got to remember, Putin didn't start it murdering and attacking other nations. He started with the corruption within his own country first. He became a dictator of Russia first. Then
Mhm.
he wants to be a dictator of other nations.
Yeah.
That's how it goes. The cancer spreads. So go out there and unite yourself. Maybe you're not a spokesperson, or maybe you're a little bit timid. You don't want to be in front of the cameras. I get that. I
Mhm.
understand that. So support the ones that are called to be in front of the cameras.
Mhm.
Support those that are leading the charge, but they need you. You see, I cannot do much by myself.
Mhm.
I can tackle one giant. Let's say I'm David. Yeah, I can fight with the giant, but I need the army to go and chase the Philistines.
Right.
Without the army, you cannot defeat the army of the enemy. You need more people. We need each other desperately. So
Okay. Yeah.
anyone, everyone can do something. Don't kid yourself. Even grabbing a telephone and calling the premier or sending an email
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
saying, "Back off, drop the charges, or we
Yeah.
will keep annoying you until Jesus comes back."
Yeah.
And if a million people did it, then perhaps there is a chance that the charges will be dropped and I can be a free man again.
Yeah. So, is for those that are wanting to help you in this battle that you are facing, that is not close to being over, is there a website that we can direct people to help support what you're doing?
Yeah, www.streetchurch.ca, streetchurch.ca, because we are on the streets feeding the homeless and people can donate over there. I'm contemplating of hiring another set. I have a few sets of lawyers fighting the criminal charges. I'm contemplating of hiring another set of civil lawyers that will file a lawsuit against the government, against the Riemann Center,
Mhm.
for treating me the way they did. So it's a huge fight. We're dealing with extremely powerful and corrupted individuals. What seems with unlimited resources. So we
Mhm.
need funds, we need pit bulls, we need lions to keep roaring. This fight is not going to be won by one individual or one organization. We need each other, and we need
Mhm.
each other desperately. We don't have time to to do little skirmishes about our little theological differences. This is not time to do that. This is the time to unite for freedom, because this big fish wants to eat you and the same fish wants to eat me. So we better align ourselves together to deal with the
Yes.
big fish. And if it's your hobby to fight afterwards, well, be my guest. I got no time for stuff like this.
Amen. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on today, and thanks for sharing your story. And I just hope that we can have more people willing to go out and fight and to stand. And I love what you said. Just if it overrides what God calls us to do, then we need to practice what God says more than anything and hold to that truth. And we know that truth sets free. So prayers for you and for all that you all are doing. And I'll make sure I put that in the show notes where people can go and check more about what you're doing. So I appreciate you coming on today. God bless you and all that you're doing up in Canada.
Thank you
Thank
very much.
you.
God bless you. Thank you.
God bless. Thank you.